This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Why the Bucks fired Jason Kidd.
For us, at the end of the day, we have goals and expectations for this
Why
team.
the Bucks fired Jason Kidd.
And we truly believe that making a change now
Why the Bucks fired Jason Kidd.
gives us the best chance to have success, not only this season, but going
Why
forward.
the Bucks fired Jason Kidd.
I don't want upheaval there, and I would keep J. Kidd. I don't understand this.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cali Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Fresh out the box. Man, the news just keeps on turning in the league, man. What a day already, and we haven't even gotten to the second day of the week. Out in Milwaukee, changes are happening, and it could change the direction of the Milwaukee Bucks franchise. To discuss it, you know I got to do it with my right-hand man, 50 grand, NBA aficionado, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC, my man, Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. I know you didn't crash your whip when you saw this news bite trickling down the Twitter wire.
I did not, sir. I was seated in my place of business, if you will, kind of just like, wait a minute, it's kind of scrolling through Twitter casually. Then all of a sudden got that Woj bomb that Jason Kidd has been let go by the Milwaukee Bucks, man. So much to discuss, man. Didn't see this coming per se. I know Kidd has been in the news in the last couple of weeks, not really defending Milwaukee so much as saying, their youth isn't an excuse, or it can be an excuse, or it can't be an excuse anymore. And all these other things too, but there's a lot of layers to peel back with the Jason Kidd firing in Milwaukee, brother.
Definitely. And so if people are not fully aware of what we're talking about or what we will be talking about, the Milwaukee Bucks have decided to part ways with Jason Kidd. Now, if you read all of the periodicals and all of the headlines, it's saying that the Milwaukee Bucks have fired Jason Kidd. Now, I don't know about you, but in the sports media business, parting ways, fired, sometimes they can mean the same thing, and sometimes it can mean a whole lot more. And the two words can mean worlds apart in the understanding of what was transpiring, outside of that basketball court. So we're going to dig into that in our segment of the breakdown in a few moments. We want to definitely hear from you. So, one of the big topics of conversation is going to be, are you good with the idea that the Milwaukee Bucks have fired Jason Kidd not even halfway into, or basically halfway into, this 2017-2018 season? Be sure to hit us here at the Baseline NBA Podcast. At NBA Baseline is the Twitter handle. To get at my man Shaw, at Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at GameFace Lee. Listen, we're available on all the major platforms, so we encourage you to download us so you can get the butter goods and the hot topic conversations that we love to throw out there for you and yours to listen to. You know how we do, and you know how we roll. It's time now for the breakdown.
Time to break it
Down to the bone gristle.
Time now for the breakdown. Cali Warren Shaw, the Baseline NBA Podcast. And the topic of conversation is the Wojo bomb, as my man Shaw aptly put in the beginning of our show. The Milwaukee Bucks have fired maligned head coach Jason Kidd. He is no longer the head coach for the Milwaukee Bucks, and it certainly stirred a lot of murmurs in the NBA community. More importantly, what kind of impact will this have on a superstar player like Giannis Antetokounmpo, which by all of his accounts has seen his stardom ascend under the coaching of Jason Kidd? And what kind of impact will that mean? What does it say about John Horst, the new GM, considering that this wasn't his hire? Was this the right time? So there's so many questions that we have airing out there, but really just to set the tone about why it may not have been the worst decision to do this. The Milwaukee Bucks right now are sitting 8th in the Eastern Conference playoff picture. They're only one game above 500. They have won only 4 out of their last 10 games. And they have not looked like the basketball team that I think we have set very high expectations to be a perennial top 4 type team in the Eastern Conference. So Shaw, I'm going to let you lay out the landscape of this, because I had even said at some particular point, man, are we not going to talk about the possibility of Jason Kidd being on the hot seat if the Milwaukee Bucks do not show signs of taking that next step and starting to contend with the better teams in the East?
The funny thing about all this is, I'm not really a big Jason Kidd guy, so let me say that. I think we all been following the NBA for a little while. You've kind of let it go to some degree, but how he got the job in Milwaukee was a little bit jacked up to begin with, right? What he's done over the last few years, has been it's been okay. I think for the talent level, yeah, they've gotten to the playoffs a couple times or whatever, and Giannis has developed under Jason Kidd to some degree. But I said that on a previous show that I don't know how much Jason Kidd had to do with what Giannis became. I don't think it's Kidd's player development so much as Giannis's hard work and maybe some of the other assistant coaches that are involved in that roster. But again, I'm not going to knock it. I'm not there. I'm not an insider for Milwaukee in one way, shape, or form. With all that said, I find the timing a little bit peculiar. So Milwaukee is struggling in ways that you wouldn't expect them to. A team with that much length and athleticism, you wouldn't expect to be next to last in defensive rebounding. You wouldn't expect them to be next to last in offensive rebounding, last in total rebounding. You just wouldn't expect that with this type of talent on this roster. And what they don't get up and down the court in an NBA where everyone's kind of running up and down. They don't get a lot of shots per game. Eric Bledsoe trade has proved to be milling results, and obviously that has nothing to do with Jason Kidd specifically. But maybe he hasn't utilized him in the right way. And it is peculiar though at the same time because this is a team that has going through some adversity. But you would have figured he hasn't had his full roster or full assortment of roster in the last 2 years. Middleton was hurt to the middle part of last year and was never fully right. Then Jabari went down. Now Jabari's still down and waiting to come back this year. This Bucks team hasn't really been what I guess it's capable of being because they haven't been healthy. At the same time, there are a lot of expectations. Remember, just a few weeks ago, we were talking about could this team have finally now be considered as a title contender because of the Eric Bledsoe trade, and like wait till Jabari gets back and things of that nature. And things have just turned left. Giannis has definitely slowed down in recent weeks in terms of the hot start that he had to begin this year. But all that said, I still find the timing to be peculiar. I thought Kidd would have probably had at least to the end of the season to figure it out, and really to see what they did and if they got into the playoffs, what they did if they got there. I'm a little stunned and shocked. Not as thrown back as I was about David Fizdale a couple months ago, but this one still kind of caught me off guard.
Well, doesn't it? I don't care what you tell me, man. Any kind of firing somewhere in the middle, the quarter, nowhere near the end of a season, I think it should always catch you off guard, because I just don't see where that type of thought process merits the idea that this is going to be good for a basketball team. I'll harken back to this, Shaw, as a parallel. Remember when the Houston Rockets fired Kevin McHale, and then they had J.B. Bickerstaff as the head coach throughout the rest of the season? And I think that the media played it more up to the idea that, well, it's something that obviously needed to happen because McHale was unhappy and Harden was unhappy and they just weren't playing for him and this, that, and the third. No. I mean, to me, it really says more about what kind of team is actually under that umbrella. And I'm just beginning to wonder, what kind of team are we seeing with the Milwaukee Bucks? By firing Jason Kidd, are we really putting the onus on the fact that the team needs a new voice? As much as what we're saying is, are we really buying into the moves that John Horst is making to make this a better team? Now, I'm not blaming John Horst, but it's clear to me that John Horst is not in favor of Jason Kidd, and I get that. But when you fire a head coach halfway into a season in which you are still a top 8 seed in the East, it speaks more volumes that you may be more reckless to what this team may wind up being, or what they end up being, so to speak, if they don't at least meet these expectations. And then what is the perception going to be when you have star athletes who are interested in playing next to Giannis Antetokounmpo, but are questioning the motivations and the decision-making process when it comes to the head coaching, when it comes to staff, management, and even some players that on a whim, they're just going to get rid of people simply because it might feel like it's not the right situation or the right thing. To me, it just sets a tone and a tenor that makes things very shaky. What would otherwise be something stable right now for a Bucks team that's still very young.
Right. They're young. They're still in the thick of it. And obviously with a ton of time in essence to turn things around and could very easily finish out of the playoffs or very easily finish, as a top 4 team in the Eastern Conference. I see it can go either way. And I guess from the management standpoint is that there's something more behind this other than the X's and O's. And again, I'm going to go back to how Kidd got his job. Kidd is an abrasive personality that seems like he might grate on a team, not only the players, but as even the organization where he came in there with the ownership being some of his best friends, if you will, too. But maybe some of that has started to wear down a little bit. And he kind of wrought his welcome, and all kinds of reports, even as we record right now, popping up about Jabari Parker hasn't spoken to Jason Kidd in months, and how that relationship was estranged, and whatever the other situation is with some other players that have been on that roster, where Kidd wasn't necessarily their favorite coach, but they just kept it moving because they were trying to be professional about it. I think this is what it is. To me, this is what just has to be about. It's not so much X's and O's, although he gets killed on basketball Twitter and analysis for his defensive schemes, and the fact that he's not using that athleticism to the best of its own ability. They give up a lot of points in the paint, and all you got to do is move the ball on them, really, like any good offense was, and you're going to get a good basket. But to me, this seems more about his inability to control the locker room and to build meaningful relationships with his players and maybe even some of the front office.
You're tuned to the Baseline. Callie, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, and this is our segment of the breakdown. We're discussing the news that is clearly taken over the NBA landscape right now. Head coach Jason Kidd has been let go by the Milwaukee Bucks. The Milwaukee Bucks currently in 8th seed right now in the Eastern Conference playoff picture. All right, so I want to pick apart something, Shaw, that I think resonates with what this perception may look like for the Milwaukee Bucks. By doing this, Shaw, does this in any way taint the perception of the Milwaukee Bucks? In other words, as I was saying before, we can look at what Jason Kidd isn't, what he hasn't done, but the moves in which you make in order to validate or justify your premise, your thought process, what you're intending to do, does it in many ways leave open the opportunity to set yourself back as an organization who may want to dabble in the free market, who may want to sell the idea that you have the right personnel that will appease and attract free agents that would normally want to go into a bigger market that are not going to be otherwise sold on when they see things like this take place?
I understand where you're going with it. I just don't feel like, in terms of the free agent selling, if you will, or that, Milwaukee's just never been a free agent destination, and Kidd being there or not being there, I don't think was going to help that one way or the other. You would have hoped maybe he could have had some goodwill or barter some goodwill, maybe with some players, and as a guy who was going to be a Hall of Famer, if you will. But I don't think from a Milwaukee standpoint, his firing or him not being there is going to have any impact. You just hope that with Giannis and Chris Middleton, who's just a very good and still underrated basketball player, that would attract some of the smarter, higher IQ level basketball players who are looking potentially to win and potentially to build with a nice young core. But overall, I don't think Kidd has anything to do with the culture of the franchise in terms of it being attractive to free agents.
Well, but see, that's the thing, Shaw. I'm not talking about Jason Kidd and the culture. I'm talking about John Horst and what kind of culture he's building. In other words, if you don't hear players like Giannis Antetokounmpo, guys like Malcolm Brogdon coming out, Chris Middleton, Jabari Parker coming out and really throwing Jason Kidd under the bus. And I'm not saying that you completely buy into the fact that they get out on Twitter or they get out in front of the cameras and say, oh my God, I'm totally devastated. This is so wrong. It's so egregious, or whatever the case may be, that they fired Jason Kidd. Again, I'm not talking about the person as much as I'm talking about the action and the timing of the action. You don't think that in ways this may reflect badly on the Milwaukee Bucks? I mean, didn't we not address it in the same light with the Memphis Grizzlies? No matter what you say about David Fizdale, whether you agree or disagree, whether you are on the side of Marc Gasol or not on the side of Marc Gasol, it's the idea of you doing it as an organization that has never been good when it comes to going out there and selling the organization as a free agent destination. Because of some of the things that you do, it doesn't validate or make sense in comparison to what the team has been of as over the last few seasons.
I mean, again, I think there's some question to that, some validity to that, but I'll take that statement and kind of counter it in in a very reactive type of way in all of a few hours in which this news has kind of broke. But I think with David Fizdale, there were players from other teams tweeting, "Wow, unbelievable! This is tell me this is not a business." Almost everybody to a man coming to Fizdale's aid in that specific situation, where we know Memphis as an organization has not run itself, in the best ways possible in recent years. I think Milwaukee, in a lot of ways, has kind of been under the radar and not necessarily been a good ran organization, or definitely not a poorly ran organization. They've just kind of been there. And, maybe to your point, it was like, okay, well, maybe they should be trying to be more, not necessarily boisterous, but trying to garner some more goodwill. But that hasn't been the case. They've just been like kind of a middling franchise, especially when it comes to free agents and in overall news, other than the scandal in essence, and I put that in air quotes, that brought Kidd there to begin with when he stole Larry Drew's job. So I think you haven't seen that right now in terms of the Kidd firing, where all these other players, like, I can't believe it, oh my God, and such and such and such. It's just been kind of, radio silence, and maybe I think the course around the league is that, again, Jason Kidd wasn't a great dude. This is what it boils down to. Reports are saying that Giannis is a little bit upset about it. But outside of that, it doesn't feel like it's the same thing like it wasn't with Fizdale, where the organization was really, really, really to blame in that situation. I think Milwaukee's a little bit off the hook when it comes to Jason Kidd.
All right, so what does this say? What does this mean now for Giannis Antetokounmpo as a player, and clearly the leader of this basketball team? Now, I understand that they're going to wind up leaning on their interim coach. I can't imagine that they're going to look for anybody to hire and come in at this particular junction to I guess, quote unquote, turn things around for the Milwaukee Bucks. You can only hope that this really rests on, what's left of this team between coaches and the players. But what does this mean now for Giannis Antetokounmpo? Is this now a wake up call for him? Not necessarily that it's something that is negatively going to react on him, the perception of him or anything like that. But as far as what he needs to do and wants to do as being an all-star, right? He's now a multiple all-star, and really more to the idea that he truly can be a front runner, a leader, somebody that I think ingratiates the willingness for another head coach to want to come there and have an input and have a say on him helping that basketball team become better.
Well, I think with Giannis, he's in a very interesting situation. As we're recording, and I'm going to take it left just slightly, I want to give Ramona Shelburne from ESPN some props because she's tweeting right now as we're recording conversations she's had with Jason Kidd, and it speaks almost directly to what you're saying in terms of what Giannis is to this franchise. And his even feeling about the firing of Jason Kidd, where apparently, according to Ramona Shelburne, Giannis called Jason Kidd 15 minutes before he got a call from the ownership and said, "Hey, coach, they called me. This isn't right. But what they're about to do is they're going to let you go." And Giannis apparently tried to appease and try to talk to the ownership and save Kidd's job, but the decision was kind of already made. So in this regard, I think, Giannis is definitely going to have that perception as a good guy who wants to be with the same team, doesn't want things to change around him too much. Obviously, maybe player personnel, as if you're bringing in better players per se, but he wants his ownership, he wants his coaching, he wants those things to be stable because he believes in what Milwaukee is doing and the future that he can have there on that franchise, and has come out and said that he doesn't want to switch teams. He doesn't want to be Kevin Durant and jump to the next roster. He wants to be a Buck for life. And I think that says a lot about Giannis in this situation. But again, even going back to our earlier point, where the ownership had kind of, this is not something they came to a rash decision, but they went, and in essence, if this gets out, can barter them some goodwill in essence, because they told their franchise player first. They didn't even tell the coach. They told their franchise player first what their decision was, what they were going to do, how they were going to do it. And he's the one who kind of, I guess, I almost want to say maybe backdoored them and went and called Jason Kidd and was like, hey, bro, you're going to be on the lookout. I tried to tell them, but they're not having it. So I think this is a very interesting development, and great reporting by Ramona Shelburne on ESPN for bringing this to light. And again, I think Giannis and Jason Kidd, maybe they had a much better relationship than maybe some people thought they did.
All right. So, and now to your point, Shaw, you brought up how this may reflect on John Horst, right? Was this so you, in your mind, in your belief is that his move to have this conversation with Giannis before actually sitting down and breaking the news to Jason Kidd, this was a good thing, right? For him and the type of person that he is, and then also for the organization, because we've seen how sometimes this gets played. Some of these coaches don't even so much as get a text message. They usually find that out when Michelle Beatty is, straight brazen them on Sports Nation, you know what I'm saying? And with Marcellus Wiley and company. So we've seen the worst of how these things can play themselves out. But if you're talking about the Milwaukee Bucks, an organization, a franchise that has been maligned since the 1950s as far as being taken seriously as a basketball franchise. And, listen, even when they had Ray Allen, who was a franchise player, I don't think that they took him seriously. And you have a once in a lifetime, a generational type player in Giannis Antetokounmpo. Do you think that the idea here is making sure that John Horst is reaffirming him on the idea that we can't do this without you, as much as I need to do what's necessary to elevate this franchise, this organization to where I think it should be?
Like I said before, I think this is an amazing showing by Horst in this instance of kind of understanding.
And mind you, John Horst is only 34 years old. We're not talking about like Daryl Morey, you know what I mean, or R.C. Buford, guys who have been in this thing for a minute. This guy, I'm older than this dude, okay? So to show that kind of maturity and that approach, unconventional, but definitely something, to your point, Shaw, where it says something about how he wants to do things differently when it comes to the Milwaukee Bucks.
Right, and just understanding today's market. What it means to have a franchise All-NBA type player on your roster. What do you inform them? And I think there's some people, old school people, is like, listen, the player's a player, and that's the end of it. You're going to go with whatever the organization has to say. I think Horst was definitely trying to, in essence, barter some goodwill. Although the decision was made already, he at least wanted to tell Giannis first. And, again, maybe that makes the next head coach maybe hesitant. But I think from a player relation standpoint with the general management, hey, it was a good move. It wasn't like they called Malcolm Brogdon or John Henson, and told them. They told Giannis, their star guy. And they treated him the level of a LeBron James type player who, a lot of people always make jokes, is really kind of pulling the strings behind the scenes in Cleveland. They treated him like a Kobe Bryant. They treated him like a Kevin Durant. Even a Russell Westbrook now in OKC, James Harden in Houston. You are our guy. Here's what we are trying to do with our team and our franchise. Again, not necessarily asking for his blessing on it, but at least informing him and not letting him get blindsided, by Twitter or something else, whatever the case may be. So I think in that regard, it kind of takes the conversation maybe a little different place from where we were earlier in our show. That Horst, in essence, again, he's trying to understand the pulse of his team and definitely the pulse of the NBA as we move forward.
All right, Joe Prunty now is going to be the interim head coach for this team moving forward. What do we know about Joe Prunty, Shaw? And even if given whatever happens with this team, do you think that he actually has a shot at being the long-term head coach for the Milwaukee Bucks?
I mean, I don't know too much about him, to be very honest, and I don't want to speak ill of him in any way, shape, or form, or give him praise where it's maybe not necessarily deserved. I think a couple of reports out there said that Monty Williams will be somebody that the Bucks will be looking heavily at, trying to get him back on the coaching sidelines. Obviously, Fizdale's name is one that is going to continue to come up. The Lakers have been linked to him if they were to fire Luke Walton. But Fizdale, I think, makes a lot of sense for maybe what Milwaukee will want to do as well too. But I think in the interim time, as you mentioned, yeah, Prunty is going to get the shot. And they'll figure out how they want to handle it. Again, it's fresh, man. It really is. It's just so new. But I'll say this from a very general standpoint that obviously most assistant coaches have a much better relationship with some of the players, because they're the ones that can smooth things over a little bit if the head coach is maybe grading a little bit. I don't know that that's Prunty's relationship with his team, but the biggest thing I'm interested to see is like, does this have any impact on rotations? Because certain guys, like maybe like a Thon Maker, who was getting a lot of minutes last year because Middleton was out, he hasn't really been a featured guy that much this year thus far. Does that change in any way? Does that mean Henson goes back to the bench? You kind of wonder like those little things. Does Brogdon stick in the starting lineup? Do they finally bring Bledsoe off the bench now as a result? Those are the types of things that I want to see what happens now, with another coach in there. But I can't speak. It's too early to know if Prunty is going to be the guy long term or whether or not he's just a stopgap.
Well, I'm looking, and I just looked up this information with regards to Prunty. I mean, the guy has definitely got a pretty nice resume, right? I mean, he came under the coaching tree of Greg Popovich. He started off as a video coordinator, an assistant video coordinator. He's had stints with the Dallas Mavericks under Avery Johnson. He's had stints with Byron Scott. And I believe they were with the Brooklyn Nets or the New Jersey Nets at that particular time frame. And so now, he's under, Jason Kidd. And I'd like to think that part of the reason why is because he had a relationship with Jason Kidd going all the way back during that time frame when the New Jersey Nets, were making those runs for, towards, the Eastern Conference and towards NBA championship aspirations, so to speak, right? So, I mean, the guy has been around the block. It'll be interesting because you could easily make an argument that this type of guy is somebody that if you want to move in a different direction, he would probably be more qualified to be the head coach for this basketball team than Jason Kidd would be, right? But my thing is, Shaw, is what do you do now? I mean, you mentioned Monty Williams. I think Monty Williams is an adequate selection. Am I completely enamored if they went in the direction of Monty Williams? I don't know, right? Like, there's some coaches that I really think that their pulse of being great is maybe being as an assistant head coach, providing the X's and O's on one facet of the game, the part of the game that sorely needs help or needs to be maintained to be played at a higher level. The real head coaches are the ones that I think innovate the mind, push these guys to play at a level that is beyond themselves and maybe beyond their own expectations. And I would be hard pressed to think that if you went through all of this trouble, that you're going to get a coach that is, middle of the pack, hasn't quite yet proven himself. But I'm not saying that you got to go out and get the flashy pick, but you certainly got to get somebody that is going to be innovative. Like a Budenholzer, somebody that has got a different approach and style to getting to some of these guys, because I think that is what it's going to take to pull the best out of what we're seeing from this Milwaukee Bucks team.
Well, yeah, I don't think they're not the Knicks, the early Knicks, where every coaching move had to be something super splashy. And again, this is all conjecture and rumor at this point right now when it comes to Monty Williams, Fizdale, and of the like. They probably going to take a hard step back. What are we, 2-3 weeks away from All-Star right now? Maybe they use that time to conduct interviews and, maybe try to start All-Star after All-Star fresh. I don't know. I don't know exactly how they want to handle it. But you would hope that in this situation, and to your point, is if they've been feeling this out for a little while and thinking about firing Jason Kidd, because all reports are saying, it's been in the works now for a few weeks. They didn't just wake up today and say, you know what, we've had enough. If they've been thinking about it for a couple of weeks, that they've been also then maybe trying to line up potential guys that they would want to bring in and potentially fill the position. So again, Maybe it's Prunty, maybe it's Monty Williams, maybe it's Fizdale, maybe it's somebody else we haven't even talked about. Van Gundy, Jeff Van Gundy's name is
How about
often
David?
thrown
How about
around.
David Blatt? David Blatt
Yeah,
would certainly have some motivation.
Yeah, after his appearance, on TV earlier over the weekend, kind of trashing the Cavs, and it'd be interesting to have him back in that conference.
Well, I mean,
Yeah, but
listen, the Cavaliers' defense was trash. He was just merely, highlighting what he doesn't want his all-star team, committing to defensively, which was the Olay defense. But still,
I mean, and it was buzzworthy, no doubt about it, and it got all the headlines that were necessary. But I think with Milwaukee, they have to be smart, and as you alluded to, not just trying to pick the flavor of the month or somebody who gives them a splashy name, and with a great title. It has to be the right fit because they still have young guys who want to develop, but guys that are competitive. Like I said, Giannis is a beast, MVP type candidate, NBA All Franchise player, whatever. Chris Middleton is supremely underrated. And I think Eric Bledsoe has taken a step back since coming to Milwaukee, but still can be a better player than he's shown there. And Brogdon obviously is a rookie of the year. So they have such pieces there that can really, really mold and become a perennial elite team in the Eastern Conference if they get it all together.
I will say this much, Shaw, before we, before we square up everything here with regards to this news. Whoever becomes the head coach for this Milwaukee Bucks team really needs to get into the ear of their backcourt. I just feel like you have to be committed of one of two things. Either you're going to play Giannis in the way that LeBron James ultimately groomed himself as when he played for the Cleveland Cavaliers. There's one thing that I will honestly say about Mike Brown. While he was never regarded as a legitimate head coach, and I actually beg to differ in that. He wasn't a great head coach, but he was a legitimate head coach. He understood who the most talented player was and how the most talented player wanted to kind of etch his game, during that time. And he let him do that. I think he allowed him a little bit too much freedom. I think if you have someone like a Giannis Antetokounmpo, you have to think in the same context that you think of with a LeBron James. No, he doesn't have the same scoring capabilities like LeBron James. He hasn't developed that shot quite the same way yet like LeBron James. But there is an it factor in him. There's something in him that will make you have to decide, are you doing this through Giannis or are you doing it through a completely well-rounded basketball team to take the burden off of Giannis? And if you're going to go with the latter option, then you need to develop some kind of some relationship with the Brogdons and the Bledsoes of that team. Because part of the reason why I see that struggle with that Milwaukee Bucks team is whatever it is that Jason Kidd was trying to communicate, if he was communicating to his backcourt, it was not translating on the basketball court. And you would think that if you have a all-world Hall of Fame point guard who's led teams to great records and won an NBA championship and this, that, and the third, he would have been able to get in the ears of guys like Brogdon, like Snell, like Bledsoe, and allowed those guys to put that team in a position where the offense would have looked a lot more fluidly than it's been under Jason Kidd.
Well, I don't disagree. I think the Milwaukee backcourt has been an immense disappointment. And like I said before, Bledsoe hasn't quite been as good as they would have hoped, or I think even he would have as hoped to play. And maybe this change will maybe shake things up a little bit. Even before they acquired him, there was a conversation. Okay, when they get him, what happens? Does he come off the bench? Does Brogdon go to the bench? Do they continue to start Tony Snell? I like Tony Snell as much as the next guy, but I just don't feel he's an NBA starter, and not even on that team. I feel like you can play Bledsoe and Brogdon together, and they've recently started to do that. Although the results have been middling, but that is still a result of their defense overall and the defensive schemes that Kidd had in place for his roster. So whatever happens here, you need that backcourt to be better, and you need all the young guys on that team to develop and become a cohesive unit, because everybody sees it there. But you don't want this team to be, whatever, an OKC or Orlando Magic or whoever, for however many years ago, teams that were just so good. You saw it. You saw the pieces there and thought they were going to be a dynasty of some sort. And then all they did was reach middling playoff success or no playoff success at all. I'd hate to see that to be the story, because then they end up on 30 for 30, in 5-10 years, and it's just not something that we're going to look upon favorably. So I wish this team the best, man. I want to see them succeed. Fear the Deer is definitely something that I think a lot of NBA teams or a lot of NBA players and supporters realize and think can be a real thing out there. And we want to see playoff Giannis. We want to see playoff Middleton have great success. And it is going to come down to how they're coached and how they develop even off the court.
The Milwaukee Bucks are 23-22 as we've recorded this podcast, and they sit 4 games back from the top position in the Central Division, and they run as the 8th seed right now in the East. What an awesome breakthrough show, Shaw. Like, normally, we like to throw things out towards the end of the week, allow some time for things to fester, but I don't think that this situation, could settle without us kind of plugging in and giving our perspective on this. And there's so many, to your point, there's so many layers to this, and it's never good. It's funny, Shaw. I don't even think we even got to, what this impact again may mean when you talk about how the perception is to the national, to the coaches around in the NBA. Rick Carlisle said that he's very surprised, albeit I'm not completely buying into the idea that Rick Carlisle is an absolute fan of Jason Kidd, and certainly was never a fan of how Jason Kidd wound up getting that job in Milwaukee. But nonetheless, he's still a part of that fraternity. He's a part of the coaches. And so how coaches are fired, how they're let go, I think it speaks volumes about, again, the trend that it sets, the tone that it sets of how at times coaches wind up being the ones that get thrown under the bus. And forget just getting thrown under the bus, man. The bus runs over them back and forth like 4 times over, just simply because there seems to be at times a lack of etiquette, of a loyalty in the way that things are approached. And I understand things get visceral. I understand that sometimes things can get contentious between the management and with the head coaches. But certainly how it's being done, I still think can speak volumes with the way other coaches perceive how their job security is being looked at when it comes to these type of situations.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. And the coaching fraternity is exactly that. So they're going to have to get it right. Milwaukee is 100%. If they don't want to have long-lasting damage to this franchise and become a team that's just kind of under the radar to a team that is now completely perceived in a negative light. So they got to handle this with kid gloves moving forward. And I use that term, no pun intended. But I definitely
Of course not. Of course not. Oh, my goodness.
But
the savagery on this podcast, my man. My goodness.
But like I said, I'm a person that wants to see this franchise be good and reach that next level of success, because I hate to see young talent kind of go to waste. So they have to get it right. And hopefully they have still some goodwill among the coaches out there, and whoever the next coach's agent is, I'm sure they'll probably put some contingencies in there and just say, okay, we need to have an open relationship. And I think Giannis will be involved in the decision-making process a little bit as well too. So I wish them the best, man. We'll see what happens with Jason Kidd. Our guy Joe Cardoso, who was saying that we might see him on the players only show in a couple of weeks, to say I think he's a little bit too salty right now to probably be doing that. But maybe we'll see him.
They definitely ain't gonna have that open court conversation with him about saying what
stings a little bit.
I'm telling you, man, don't be sitting next to guys like Avery Johnson. They might have a little bit too much to say about how organizations treat them on their way out the door.
But I think we'll probably see him again, maybe for the playoffs. ESPN is usually good at, smoothing it over with some of these guys when they let go, and then saying, all right, whatever, come on for our playoff show, or whatever the case may be. So this is not the last of Jason Kidd. I firmly believe that he likes and enjoys coaching, and is going to try to find another opportunity somewhere. Where that is, we don't know, obviously, right now. But I'm positive we'll see him again somewhere down the line.
Definitely. Well, and just to give people an idea, maybe the timing of this isn't absolutely the worst timing in the world when you look at where this basketball team is. They have a very favorable schedule over the next week or so. They take on the Phoenix Suns, the Brooklyn Nets, the Chicago Bulls, and the Philadelphia 76ers. So those can easily be winnable games. I'm sure there's going to be some kind of a transition period But there's opportunity there for Joe Prunty to look like a star for the Milwaukee Bucks if he can eke out at least eke out wins in 3 of those 4 games. Because then it starts to get a little hectic when you have to take on the Minnesota Timberwolves at the beginning of February. So interesting situation nonetheless, and maybe a smart play by John Horst nonetheless. Awesome show altogether, Shaw, man. And what more can be said, man? We keeping our finger on it, and we got to speak about it once it comes out, man. Bring them out. Bring them out.
100, man. So kudos to you for being able to jump on the emergency pod here so that we can give this to our fans and listeners. This is big news. And anytime a coach gets fired, we're on top of it, or any big news in the NBA, big trade, we're going to give you the butt of goods, as my man likes to say. So salute to all defense listeners of NBA Baseline. Thank you for tuning in. This was a good one. A rough one, a shocking one at the same time. But, we're going to keep our finger on the pulse of all the action happening in the NBA all season long.
Most definitely, Shaw. So for the Baseline, Callie, Warren Shaw, once again, we'd like to thank Adrian Wojnarowski for the Wojo Bomb, Ramona Shelburne for the awesome reporting and insight. And to all those listening in, keep us locked, man. We'll catch up with you next time.